I think we're getting right up to time. So, Paul, you want to get started? Our first thing is 5-minute presentations. Why don't you go ahead and get started, Paul?
All right, you got it. All right, so then you guys see my screen okay? Close the gap?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, thank you, everyone. So today we know that everyone's sat through presentations and discussion today. We want to keep it real snappy. So we wanted to think a lot about the audience who's going to be at Focus on the Future and talk about some key aspects for active transportation and just be available. We've got a couple slides. I've got a few slides on planning aspects, and then we want to be available for some discussion. And we'll keep it quick, right? Because we had scheduled this pretty much every 10 minutes would be a different topic and a speaker related to active transportation to some degree. So to my friends at OCTA, some of this will look a little familiar. We've wanted to highlight and kind of give credit to a lot of the work that was done within Orange County over the past 6 to 8 years, really. So the graphic on the screen is the outcome of 4 planning studies that were led by OCTA, the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and OCCOG. So with funding from those agencies, there was this regional bikeway planning done. And the map on the screen shows all the different jurisdictions. There's 34 cities within Orange County, but each of the planning studies said, how can we connect bikeways, existing and future bikeways across city boundaries and really think about the regional destinations? So 41 different corridors were identified. They had both existing and future needs. And then it identified dollar amounts, right? When you think about kind of the focus on the future crowd, being able to say a planning study with some dollar amount is really critical so that we could think about how we're going to fund it and go after, you know, funding pursuits, whether it's local, regional, or the state and federal funding as well. So this is specific to bikeway planning. And it identified 41 corridors. This is still a big geography, but on this map, it looks like a lot. What came out of this was this idea of the OC Loop right around the year 2014. So we're going on 6 years with this idea, the OC Loop, and the graphic here now is focused on Northern Orange County. When it first was developed, the idea with the OC Loop was to have as much as possible an off-street route. It's a 66-mile loop. At the time, about 70% of this was constructed, and an identified need of about $100 million was quantified with all these regional partners, OC Parks, and the different jurisdictions that the gaps existed. So identifying that $100 million need and then working with the agencies, both the regional and the local agencies, they've been able to actually move forward on about 10% of it already, getting us to 80%. There's still progress and a lot of grant pursuits that have been submitted that would continue to close the gaps. And some of this is local stuff led by the County of Orange or a local agency, or potentially Caltrans as well. So there's a lot of collaboration across boundaries. So this would be an off-street facility primarily for bicycling and walking as well. And then some of the region-wide planning work that was done at OCTA, this map is more focused on pedestrian travel within the county. So you kind of get this blob of a heat map that shows, you know, the purple. So for everyone's benefit, this idea was to be able to use a GIS-based analysis and look at a lot of data to say, where are the high need locations within the county? And when you look at this map, it doesn't quite tell you as much, but when you break it down and you normalize it for each jurisdiction, you could say, well, for example, here in the city of Laguna Niguel, the high need areas for pedestrian improvements are located mainly in the northern area of the city or the northeast part near the 73 freeway and along major roadways where the volumes are high, and other inputs really helped bring that to light. So the idea on this was to do those planning efforts to say, for city staff, when something comes up and there's some issue, whether it's city manager or city council or the community that wants to see improvements on this topic, that you've got some background and some strong content and material that the local agency could lean upon. So here was this collaboration between OCTA and the region and the local agencies to be able to start mapping this out and start identifying where are those places we can improve for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So those are just the 4 slides that we had. We wanted to just highlight those and talk about how these agencies have worked together and be available if there's questions or discussion. There's another few slides that Ryan is going to do in about 5 minutes. So we're at 3:45 and wanted to be available if anyone has any questions. Anyone? Could be the OCTA people or anyone that's outside of the county on how this type of work was done.
Hey, Paul, we have a note from Lauren Ledbetter here saying she would love to know what factors you use to weight the maps for high need areas.
Right. Yeah, and I apologize. I can't see the chat because of the way the screen is set up for me. So then Lauren, thank you, Lauren. Lauren is up at VTA and does a lot of active transportation work there. So the OC Active Report is published now on the OCTA website, so it's got all those details. But generally, when the inputs were being created, the idea was actually to cater to the active transportation program funding criteria as much as possible. So it has kind of the typical things you would think about, the socioeconomics, crash history, traffic volumes, the demand, where the densities are for population or employment. And then there was a PDT that was able to say, you know, how do we want to weight and give more emphasis to different criteria? So all that is spelled out in that document and published on the OCTA website. And it's all branded under the OC Active brand for the final report. Thanks, Ryan. Any other ones in the chat or questions or comments on the phone?
Hi, Paul. This is Charlie Larwood at OCTA. You talked a little bit about catering to whatever grants are out there, and why do you think that's so important?
Right. So then really we knew that from the regional perspective, an agency like OCTA is trying to help those local agencies as much as possible, get a piece of that pie, get that money that we've all contributed to in some way, typically SB1. So the idea was really, how can we help those agencies further the planning for bicycle and pedestrian work and really get them ready to go after those grants and give that content. So, you know, the understanding kind of this self-help scenario that you can provide some sort of match funding with the self-help funding, but then be able to get that money in those competitive grants from the state. So traditionally we talk a lot about the active transportation program, but I would, you know, I don't want to steal Ryan's thunder, but, you know, certainly we've talked a lot about bundling pursuits and really thinking about active transportation and linking it with other funding as well. Other thoughts or questions?
Paul, I'd like to, we still have to spin the wheel for a gift card.
That's right.
So let's go ahead and do that. And again, anybody that has questions on these short presentations, feel free to send those to Paul, or you can put them in the open chat. We'll make sure we get back to you. So this happens to be Roya. You don't see her, but she's going to be spinning the wheel for the first gift card. I'm trying to do the click, click, click.
Is that what that was?
Is that what that was?
Hector Casillas.
All right. Congratulations. And so does anybody, I should know, does anybody know what the prize is?
It's a $25 gift card just to buy whatever you want.
All right. Perfect.
Cool. How do you guys do that? That's really cool.
I don't know. That's as far as I go.
I didn't see my name. Are we all there?
Yeah. Yeah, we have somebody loading in the names as they're coming in.
Thank you.
So Ryan, do you want to go ahead? I think we're almost right at 3:50. You want to go ahead and talk about the grant funding that the question was talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to confirm, Rob, you see everything on my screen?
I just see your regular PowerPoint. I don't see it playing to a presentation yet. Hit the
Oh
little
boy.
white, the
Hold on.
screen thing.
There we go. Now you see it.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rob. So for all, my name is Ryan Bissiger. I am business development director here at Mark Thomas. So, what am I, a business development director, doing talking about grant funding and how to leverage, and like Paul mentioned about the planning efforts, about self-help funds and leveraging it to bring it in to your regional agency or down to your local agencies. And that's because over the past 4 years, I've really focused on grant funding and helping agencies position for and secure competitive grant funds. And so when we're looking at a project and you have this active transportation project in mind based on the planning work, and I'm going to dive into that in a second, but you want to find all the funding sources that are potentially available for your project. And the CTC staff has done a great job already of cataloging all of those various programs that can help fund active transportation projects, right? Because there's more, right, as Paul kind of alluded to, there's more than just the active transportation program. And we see that more and more often here with projects, that there's these other sources that you can go to in order to help get them funded. And so here on the slide, if you do get a chance, you can click, or not click, but this is the link you can go to find all of the programs that can fund active transportation improvements. So after you've gone through, you've identified your various funding sources that you want to go after to help secure funding for your program, and you're going to start building your grant application for these projects. One thing that I like to do is really build upon the planning that's been done. And so I'm kind of dovetailing again here right into what Paul talked about with the OC Loop down in Orange County, as well as OC Active. So both of these, as Paul mentioned, right, these plans really detailed out what the active transportation network can be for Orange County, the different types of facilities, and the different segments of OC Loop. And these planning efforts, they do a lot, right? You do a lot of it. You have all the analysis for your projects, understanding the populations you're serving, your disadvantaged communities, and identifying those. You're doing community outreach and cataloging all that information, and that is all really great information that me as a grant practitioner turns around and I gobble up that information, and I'm using it in the grant applications for my narratives, for supporting information. Another important piece with the planning efforts, as you can see, of this one-page cut sheet from the OC Loop. And that's really great because it gives you all this information in one key location, including all your project costs. And one thing that I found from my experience is that once you're working on the grant application, you're building on the costs that have been prepared before. You want to revisit those, because sometimes during the planning level, we've seen just from our experience that right-of-way costs may be shorted, or construction costs may be shorted. And it's important that when you're going to ask for grant funds, that you're getting all of those costs up to date and making sure that you're not having a shortfall in the end. And lastly, when building on these grant funding efforts and building on the planning, I like to go back to and look through land use planning. And that's becoming really important in California for that tie between transportation and housing and land use. I also think it's important to highlight the state policies. Now, Caltrans has gone through, and this what you have on screen now is directly from the California Transportation Plan 2050, highlights the document highlights state policies and goals for transportation. And that's something that can be turned around and highlighted within the grant applications. You know, looking at equity, right? We've heard a lot lately, both today and then in other presentations I've been in about transportation equity, about helping underserved communities, about accessibility, reducing GHG, reducing VMT. And then, as I mentioned, one that is really important is that tie to housing. And when I did the SB1 program applications this year, that was something that I really highlighted in all the applications, regardless of the program. And then lastly, and again, I'm going to say that I'm going to dovetail on what Paul mentioned, is bundling of projects. And this has really been highlighted through the Congested Corridors program, where agencies can take the active transportation projects and couple them in with highway projects for a larger program to be delivered and capture money for. And so on the screen, I'm showing that from Santa Cruz RTC, their successful Highway 1 project that wraps active transportation improvements in with highway improvements. And then don't forget, it may not necessarily always seem like it makes sense, but the Trade Corridor program, some of those projects, if they're like this here I'm showing on screen with the grade separation, those can also fund active transportation components. And with that, I'm at my 5-minute presentation. So thank you, and I will open it up if there's any questions.
Excellent, Ryan. So can you tell us about a couple of grants that you've currently or you've just previously worked on?
Sure. So I think one that I'm excited about was for City of Corona. They have the McKinley Street grade separation. It's a pretty interesting, unique project that's going to be going to construction next year. And one of our tasks working with the city was to help bring in additional funds to help close the gap between what they had in SB 132 funds and local funds. And so we've done a fair amount of work to rank #2 on the Section 190 list. So we're right up there at the top for the project to get funding from that program, as well as it was just recommended by CTC staff for funding through the TSEP program. And so that is not an active transportation project necessarily, but it is in a really exciting grant project that is going to help to improve safety with grade separating the pedestrian facilities and roadway facilities from the rail. And then I'll give one more. This one has a little more active transportation for you, Rob. And it's a little more close to your heart with the Ice Street Bridge. So with that project, for those who are unaware, the city of Sacramento is replacing their existing Ice Street Bridge over the Sacramento River. It's about a $200 million project. And we've been working with the city, not just in project delivery, but also securing grant funds. And it is going to build, really high quality bicycle and pedestrian facilities over the river, connecting the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento. And that project was just recommended for $15 million through the local partnership program.
Excellent. So it looks like we have about 2 minutes left before I give my presentation about interchange safety as it relates to active transportation. So Roya, do you mind popping up your screen and doing another spin? Oh, David, congratulations.
Congratulations. Hey, I want to just real quick say happy birthday, Rosa. You know who you are.
Oh, boy.
Thank you.
All right. So why don't we go ahead, get started. Since I'll need about 18 minutes to give my 5-minute presentation, I want to talk about staying safe through interchanges. This is really my passion, and it's really bicycle and ped access through interchanges, making interchanges more than just trucks and cars. As Caltrans, initially 1950s, as he started to develop these things, it was all about the trucks and cars. And then just recently, it's all about multimodal. It's trucks, it's cars, it's buses, it's people, it's bicycles, and having more of a complete interchange. Because as you know, freeways have, sometimes they'll cut right through cities, and it becomes a barrier. Really, interchanges and ped overcrossings are about the only way to connect that city. And so making sure that an interchange is designed correctly to accommodate not only cars and trucks, but bikes and peds is important. And not all interchanges are created equal. As it relates to bikes and peds, for instance, like if we had a full cloverleaf in L10, what's shown in red is uncontrolled crossing and a conflict between a bike ped and the vehicular traffic. And you can see in each direction 4 uncontrolled connections. Plus, if you're a bicyclist, between those loops is a big weave that you have to negotiate through there. If we look at a single point urban in L13, which has a signal in the middle, one signal, there's 2 uncontrolled crossings, but then there's 2 controlled crossings at signals where a pedestrian can push the button and then walk across on a walk sign. But single point urbans are really not that popular anymore. They lost popularity as bicycles and peds and everything started coming to the forefront, because in the middle, this intersection can often be 300 foot long. And it's kind of a no man's land for bicyclists as you try to get through it. I show an L7, which is a loop on and a diagonal off, as an example of one that doesn't have nearly the number of conflicts, and the conflicts are actually controlled. So you can have a push button to get you across or a signal. And so you can see it's much more user friendly as it relates to bikes and peds. I used to actually live right down here, Jamboree in the 405, and I was looking at this one day thinking, it's interesting how the sidewalk goes from one side to the other. But if you look at the key movements, the 2-lane high-speed on-ramps, both at the diagonals and the loops, it makes a lot of sense as how the pedestrian actually crosses through in a controlled movement all the way across. So it was well thought out, given the number of volume in the traffic. It makes a lot of sense. From a bicyclist standpoint, though, there's still a challenge of riding a bike through this particular area. Part of the pedestrian, experience is ADA. And so, ADA came across in 1990. Caltrans started immediately developing some curb ramps, which were new to them. And this one cracks me up. This one here is in Sacramento. I think the slope on it is like 20%. It almost goes straight up and down. But again, it was a learning experience. It was a way, what do you mean we have to have pedestrians through an interchange? Well, let's give this a try. And so, they worked on it. And since then, there's been a lot of improvements. For instance, when we're looking at a ped crossing, the thing that we're trying to do is slow down the cars on the approach to the crossing. So that's number one. Making sure that we have sight distance. So whatever design speed we're using, we're making sure that we can see somebody in the crosswalk ready to cross. Making sure that the road isn't so steep, and this is a lot of the older interchanges where this was 9–10%, for someone in a wheelchair to climb up through here was very difficult. So making sure it's not too steep, that the distance is short as possible, and then also that there's high visibility markings to designate the crossing. So I'm going to go through just a bunch of pictures quickly, but you can see here, this is old school interchange, 25 mile an hour on the approach. What we're doing now is we're squaring up those ramps. We're slowing down the design speed on the approach to the crossing. Here's an example of how it's a 1-lane crossing, but if you notice right over those markings, it opens up to 2 lanes. So to keep this as short as possible, relatively flat, make it very visible. This is a challenge, and we see these all over the place, and they're 2-lane high-speed on-ramps from the local street. And you can even see the split, the 2 red arrows, where it's optional whether or not you go through or in or to the ramp, making it extremely difficult for someone to anticipate a gap, especially at those speeds, to be able to cross. And so some things that have been done, just some recommendations, is One, this is a retrofit where they came in, they converted it to a 1-lane on-ramp, and then they introduced the 2nd lane right after the crossing. This is a new concrete nose that was poured, but you could see that the crossing is actually the same as it used to be, but the crossing distance itself, physical between the curb and curb, is much shorter. The highway design manual says that you should signalize, put a at grade pedestrian crossing where you have 2-lane on-ramps. And this is an example one. Another way you can do is you can also tighten it up. This has 2,000 cars in the peak that are making this right. We ended up putting in 2 right turn lanes and slowing down traffic, allowing the pedestrian to push the button. There's other things like chicanes, tabletops where this path crosses an entrance of an on-ramp. And if I go to off-ramps have a similar issue too, especially the older ones. High-speed 2-lane off-ramp onto the local street, making it very difficult to cross. One way to do that is make sure you square it up, slow traffic down, right turn on red, etc. If you have a very high volume off-ramp, 3 lanes making a right, as you can see here, and 2 lefts. Another way we can do that is we can achieve the same thing, but providing an island in the middle for refuge and shortening up those crossings. On the bicycle side, it's also important to have adequate shoulder widths, and then also visible conflict markings. So we're showing the green conflict marking between the on-ramp here, where the bicyclist would go. One thing that people make a lot of mistakes on is just making sure that there's no right turn with a through right, because it's extremely difficult to stripe. And what you'll notice here is that there's no marking in that second right where the through right is. So in reality, you could come back and stripe this as a through and make this much safer. Where you have these, just make sure that it's very clear and it's deliberate where you're adding your right turn pockets. In this particular case, going back to this one, we provide the bicyclist the bike lane left of the right turn lanes. We also provided a little extra wide shoulder for more comfort along the curb line. And then we widened the sidewalk and said bicycles may use the sidewalk, all in an effort to make this a nicer ride and better connectivity. And talking about connectivity, there's many different things you can do to connect and help connect the bicyclists from one side to the other. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just this path, this ribbon path that was created up here in Sacramento. And it just separates the Class 1 path through the entire interchange, making no conflicts. So you see all these ramps are high-speed 2-lane ramps, but the pedestrian and bicyclists are safely carried through the interchange. They're becoming very popular. The first one was constructed here. There's one almost finished construction in Manteca, District 10. There's another one in District 3, 2 in District 4, and 1 in District 6 that are currently in design. That's it from my presentation. I know I went a little long. Sorry about that, Ryan. I know you were timing me.
Oh, I was timing you. I'm disappointed. 2 minutes over.
Hey, thanks everyone that just joined us. So if you have questions, you can just type them in, or you can just speak. And if we don't have time, then you can also get the QR code from our backgrounds, and then the presenter can respond to your question directly, or I can. So you can always bother me for whatever. Thank you, Daryl. Daryl Johnson says it's really good presentations.
All right. So anyway, I guess going back on my presentation, because I'd like to add about 4 more minutes. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if any of you like to bicycle, but bicycling is one of my passions. And again, since I've been designing interchanges since the late 80s, trying to pull those two together and find the perfect mix. There is no perfect mix. All those things that I showed vary from district to district. Believe it or not all Caltrans districts have the same requirements, and they do things slightly different. A surprise, but I do see that things are improving, and it is easier to get across an interchange on a bike or walking. All right, Roya, do you want to spin the wheel? Tom Wheeler. Congratulations, Tom. All right, so our next one is Overlook Design Issues by Aaron Silva.
I expected Ryan to have this problem, but not myself.
Oh.
Let me try that again. All right, we good?
Yep, good to go.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Aaron Silva. I'm a project manager up in the Sacramento office. I was a pretty active cyclist. I turned into more of a dad cyclist now. I got a 6 and a 4-year-old. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I realized there might not be a facility big enough for my 4-year-old yet, but she's working on it. I'm covering some of the overlooked design issues. Sometimes it's really the small details that make a big difference in the success of a project. And so I wanted to cover some of those details when we're trying to implement and design and plan for these projects. So first off, there's several bikeway classifications, from your class 1s, which is a separated path with pedestrians and cyclists, class 2 in street with a striped delineation, class 3 where bicycles and vehicles share the lane, and then class 4 bikeways where very similar to class 1s where they're separated, however, they're exclusive for cyclists. And so I showed a table over to the right. You want to be able to select the right facility for your project. And this is the FHWA guidance, and it's really based on speed and volume. And you can see the really low speed and volume, you may get away with a class 3 bike route. But as you see those speeds and volumes increase, you quickly get into something more robust like a class 1 or a class 4. And for the purpose of this presentation, I was just going to cover some class 4 bikeway design guidance. There's a lot of good reference out there with NACTO, DIB 89, which is a Caltrans document for separated bikeways, FHWA, and even a lot of local agencies have developed pretty robust design standards. So I always like to see which agencies have been implementing these and reference their guidelines also when you're developing a project. The first thing to selecting, designing your class 4 is selecting a barrier type, and there's several options. You could see on the left of the screen some vertical delineators, and there's different types, whether they're the tall skinny ones or the shorter fat ones. You could have a grade separated bikeway, which is off to the right. And what that really means is that it's separated from the vehicle elevation and it's more at grade with the pedestrian zone, but it's delineated clearly that it's exclusive for bikes. You could have a raised median, a concrete barrier, planted median, or even down in the middle as a parking protected bikeway. Now, there's things that you want to consider when you're selecting the barrier type. One is right-of-way. There's different separations that are going to be required for different types of barrier types. And so if you have constrained right-of-way, you want to make sure that you're selecting something that could fit. Other things could be like drainage. Anytime you're changing curb lines, you're going to be impacting drainage. So making sure that your budget could sustain some of these other impacts when you're implementing a bikeway. And also parking. Something like parking, it may be a good idea. You just want to make sure that you have frequent enough parking that you are creating an actual separation between the vehicle lane and the bikeway. Oftentimes, if it's a street that only gets random parking from time to time, you're not really providing that much protection. One of the key things when you're doing a parking protected bikeway is making sure cars don't park in the parking area and the bikeway itself. It really makes for a bad facility as a cyclist. And it's interesting, a lot of the guidelines say that vertical delineators are optional when it comes to designing bikeways. I would recommend that you include them. They're pretty cheap and inexpensive in the grand scheme of things, and it really makes it clear for vehicles parking or someone new to the area that they're not supposed to park on the curbside, that they're parking out more towards the travelway, which may be unfamiliar to some. Other things that you want to consider is maintenance. Downtown Sacramento has a bunch of leaves that drop during the fall and winter. And you could see there's two pictures where there's leaf piles. One, the leaf pile was placed in the buffer area, and the other one was right in the bikeway. And so there's still a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to the maintenance, where these leaf piles could be stored. Sacramento uses something called the claw, and so that vehicle needs access in order to pick up those big leaf piles. And you may be in a more residential area that has bin pickup, and you want to consider how is a property owner going to get bins out of the bikeway, but accessed by the maintenance and getting picked up. And so if you're doing a raised curb median, you want to make sure there's either curb cuts or something to allow those bins to be accessible. And lastly, street sweeping. Not everyone has street sweeping equipment that's narrow. A lot of agencies own their own street sweeping equipment. So consider, based on your bicycle width that you have for your bikeway between your buffer and the curb, what equipment can you fit in there, and are you able to maintain it? I know that these are in high demand, and sometimes there's a long lead time on maintenance equipment. And lastly, I was just going to focus on transit, considering where you might have bus stops. This is an example of a in-lane bus stop where the island is a floating island, and the bus would pull up to that island, and the bikeway would snake behind it between the sidewalk and the bus island itself. And you just want to consider access. Rob mentioned earlier about ADA. The picture on the bottom left, that is access from the crosswalk. So it's a flush area where someone could use the push button, cross the bikeway, and get into the bus loading zone. Another example on the right is curb ramps that go down from the sidewalk and then back up to the bus pad. You could also create a speed table for the bikeway, so it's all flush between the sidewalk and the bus pad. So there's a lot of options to consider. And the same thing goes when you're looking at loading and unloading zones. How are you going to have access in a commercial area where a delivery truck could unload material and get it across the bikeway and up into their customers? So those are a few of the items that I thought were key to creating a successful project. And yeah, I'm free for some question and answer.
Hey, Aaron, we have a question in asking, did you see Monterey's presentation earlier today on North Fremont Center Lane bike path? Any thoughts to share on that project or that design?
Yeah, unfortunately, Mark Thomas didn't invite me to focus on the future. They're just using me for my presentation. No, unfortunately, I didn't see that presentation, but I have heard about projects. I know of one in San Francisco where they have class 2 bike lanes, median side. And what's interesting is that for a diverging diamond, Rob mentioned earlier, the portion where you have a crossover, you actually have bikeways on the median you're still to the right of traffic, but you're on the opposite side of the road. So I know that there's some very innovative treatments out there for bikeways, and anywhere you could reduce conflict points with vehicles. And if you could have dedicated right-of-way to cyclists, I think it's a benefit. You just always have to consider how all the other users are going to integrate, because unfortunately, we're not just designing bike facilities. It's going to have to accommodate vehicles and operations and the peak hour traffic.
Aaron, I want to jump in on that real quick. I had spent a lot of time talking to the city staff about that design, and I think within the state, we're really interested to see how things go in Monterey with the center running bikeway on Fremont. Really in those places where the community wants a cycle track or a separated bikeway, but you might have a lot of land uses and access points that really don't lend themselves to that design type. So it'll be really good to see how well that bikeway performs and how it serves the needs of the community, and see where that applicability could be used throughout the state.
Yeah, I've actually seen and used paths like that in other countries, and it works well. But to your point, Paul, it really depends on how much side friction there is along the street and whether it makes sense to be on the outside or inside.
Yeah. Hey, Debbie, you have your hand up. You have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was regards to Ryan's presentation. You know, we're looking for funding to extend that median bike lane actually, and to connect it to a local park. And so, you know, we're hoping to be able to get some Prop 68 type of funding in order to connect it to a local park. Part of the issue with the Monterey median bike lane is just that it is relatively short, and it involves a lot more things than just the median bike lane, so they couldn't extend it as far as they wanted. They're also working with Caltrans now to better design it through the next intersection, which happens to be State Highway Main Street.
Great. Well, maybe Ryan, you can reach out to Debbie after the presentation. Okay, hey, Roya, do you want to spin the wheel? Let's see who our next winner is. All
All
right,
right,
Josh.
Josh.
Congratulations.
Okay, I
Okay.
think we're coming up to last one.
All right.
Yeah.
So then I will share my screen. Can you guys see? Close the gap, 420.
Yep.
All right, so back to me again, where we've got a little bit of a tag team. So we wanted to round this out. We've talked a lot about kind of theoretical stuff. You've seen some graphics from Rob directly, you know, Rob and Aaron, but, you know, bringing it together. And we wanted to highlight a project also in Orange County. This is in the city of Westminster. So not necessarily just a bikeway, but a cultural trail. So in the city of Westminster, there's a roadway named Hoover Street. This is a north-south roadway. It's 4 lanes. On the left, you see power lines, and on the far left is also a railroad tracks. The city was looking to improve the pedestrian function. So in this graphic, you see the sidewalk with some meander being built, but without any sort of bikeway facility that's comfortable, right? Would you want to ride in that travel lane next to the garbage truck that's approaching? So, you know, you put yourself in those shoes. It's a small segment of our community that really would experience that space as it was, or as it is today, but is soon to change. So back in 2016, the Southern California Association of Governments helped work with the city to do a Go Human demonstration. So a tactical urbanism, a demonstration for a day. What if we closed a single travel lane and tested out a separated bikeway against that curb edge with now the completed sidewalk you could see and the people walking. Now this image only shows one cyclist. There was plenty of people, but you know, there's a bigger area, and this graphic shows the idea, just temporary treatments, just some basic stuff to really help with some a test during the day. And the best message we heard on that Saturday, where the city was able to test this scenario, was, when can you make it permanent? Right? So we really translated this scenario of a potential bikeway, a reconfiguration of a roadway, and gave people a chance to see what it would look like. And instead of the public coming out with pitchforks and being angry about it or some sort of detriment to their quality of life, they really wanted to see, when will this happen? So the city was able to go after urban greening grant, actually, to come up with this concept to go ahead and build that separated bikeway that has all these other features, public greening and stormwater flow management. But really what the city did is they really nailed it by saying, let's highlight the Mendez case. So this is a local legal case from the 40s that was focused on desegregating local schools. At the time, the youth were separated by ethnicity, and really the Mendez family and others took the school district to court. So this predates Brown versus Board of Education, and the city of Westminster is the heart of that for the state of California. So they said, well, why don't we round it out with all these other active transportation and stormwater benefits, but link in this opportunity for outdoor education for students to be able to walk along the corridor and learn about the desegregation case, you know, and get a little vitamin D during the site visit. So our team has been able to work on this design now that they've secured funding, and Aaron's going to talk about some more of the design issues. Aaron?
Yeah, it was a really great project where the community was really bought in and the historical significance really gave the project character. But you still have to look at some of those design details. Shown on the right is a neighborhood that had 2 access points in and out, and the bikeway is proposed on the left side of the street. So access to the bike trail or the bikeway wasn't going to be easy. Either people were going to have to go up north to the next signalized intersection if you're riding your bike, or become what we call bike salmon and ride against the grain to get to the south intersection that's signalized to get access. So making sure neighborhoods and the users are going to have access were really important. So one of the solutions was to develop a mid-block crossing, and this is supplemented with a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. And because we're narrowing the roadway by adding the bikeway, we're seeing reduction in speeds and volumes along the roadway. This was really a easy treatment to include and provide that access for that neighborhood. And the second thing is this corridor is paralleled by Union Pacific Railroad, and there's 7 intersections through the project corridor, and 5 of those are signalized. And even though we're not crossing the railroad's still heavily involved because we're modifying interconnected traffic signals. We're adding bicycle phases. And their concern is safety. Our cars are going to start queuing up on the tracks because of these changes. And so as with anything with the railroad, it wasn't easy. There's a lot of coordination, meetings, and discussions, but it ultimately became a collaboration to make this project successful. So things that you wouldn't normally see in a bikeway project but are included with this one is running preemption calculations for the railroad signal, left turn phasing. If you had a yield left turn, that doesn't quite work when you have maybe a bicycle signal phase and then a railroad signal coming in, a railroad call coming in. So changing those to protected lefts. No right turn on red blink out signs. That way when the rail equipment's being activated, vehicles now turning right that are separated by a bikeway have better visibility to know that they're not going to be turning right when their signal is red. ADA improvements behind the counterweights, and even a lot of the improvements carried down the side streets. So not even on the bikeway, but adding advanced signage to make the crossing more up to date and compliant with the METCD. So a lot of work went into designing the bikeway, especially when you consider that this is a spur track that has about 2 trains a week. But Union Pacific Railroad does tend to see that their facility could receive more traffic in the future. So we're going through this process right now as a phase 1 improvement, and there's actually a future phase which would look at advanced preemption for these signalized crossings. That's all I got, Paul.
So I think, Aaron and I are fans of these agencies that have been able to say, well, let's tackle this and really provide a benefit to the community. So let us know if you want to hear more about it. We're happy to be your cheerleaders and talk up these projects about what the issues are. With that, any questions or get to our final prize?
All right, Roy, spin the wheel. This is for the biggie. Michael Zeller. Congratulations. Maren, what did Michael win?
It's a iPod Home Mini, the newest Apple device. Sorry, Bill Higgins. I saw your name was right next, but hey, we tried. Hey, I think there's a comment on the chat from Chip Finch. They have a successful class 1 10-foot wide bike paths where pedestrians like to walk alongside each other. Pedestrians have expressed an interest in bicyclists slowing down. Bicyclists dislike the moving human barriers. Is there signage or other ways to get bikes and humans to share the right of way?
Yeah, so then, I can take a stab at this a little bit, and then Aaron, if you want to speak to it too. I would say it's kind of nice that there's that problem. That just means that there's activity. And you actually find that some agencies have built these class 1 bikeways or off-street facilities, to minimum standards. But then the reality is that people like to walk side by side. Bicyclists like to walk or ride side by side and be social, right? So finding a way to provide more space is, of course, desired, but not always realistic. There are mechanisms to provide signage and even striping as well. We've seen a lot of places, primarily like along the beach paths, really busy locations, where you can do different striping. A lot of the striping that we employ on roadways, you can mimic in different ways along off-street paths to try and manage some of that behavior as well.
Yeah, one other thing I'd add is sometimes a cyclist yelling on your left is not the most educational. So whenever you have an opportunity, if you have a trails master plan or some sort of trail map, a guideline, putting educational information on there, the right of way where pedestrians are expected to walk on the trail and where bikes are expected to use, and just kind of rules of the road is often beneficial to provide that additional education.
Hey, Aaron or Paul, has there been any studies on whether or not pedestrians stay to the right or face bicyclists coming in? Because I noticed in Southern California, they're generally walking with the bicyclists, but in Northern California, they're instructed to face the bicyclists.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, I mean, there are signs that you could put up that actually identify, stay right, essentially, and there's a graphic associated with that for pedestrians and bicyclists. So there are signs like that. I guess I could look and we could dig around if there's some sort of documented behavior associated with, which side people are walking on. I can't say I've seen something explicitly to that.
Okay. Well, I think we're to the end of our time, but I appreciate everybody dropping in. I know that you all have very busy days, and especially after being in a whole day of seminars and things just like this. So thanks for swinging by, and I hope you learned something. And again, if you want to reach out to any one of us with the QR code, or you can, talk to Miriam Frausto. You may have her email. It's mfrau@markthomas.com. That would be great.